Hello and welcome to the Note to File podcast, a collection of interviews, best practices, and candid commentary for clinical research sites. I'm your host, Brad Hightower. Our guests this week are Amanda Santimaw and Rebecca Martinez of Arizona Arthritis and Rheumatology Associates. Amanda is the Director of Clinical Research for the 9 locations of Arizona Arthritis and Rheumatology, plus 4 external physician locations. She is responsible for the oversight of over 180 current clinical trials, 17 PIs, 24 dedicated research staff, working across rheumatology, gastroenterology, endocrinology, and internal medicine. She has 15 years of experience working in phase 1 through 4 clinical trials, observational studies, and retrospective data analyses. Amanda received both her Bachelors of Science and Masters of Science in Clinical Research Management from Arizona State University. When Amanda's not at work, she enjoys spending time with her husband, daughter, and new baby, going hiking, camping, and traveling. Rebecca is the operations manager of clinical research and is Amanda's co-pilot for all locations. She has over 10 years experience in the clinical research field in rheumatology and gastroenterology. She is responsible for the successful study startup, recruitment, and maintenance for all ongoing trials. She also received her Master's of Science in Clinical Research Management from Arizona State University. I thought this was a really cool conversation from a couple of people working at the site level, which was always the original intention of this podcast, and it's kind of expanded over time. I think it's always kind of nice to go back to where things started and talking to people who were there at the site level. This week we discussed the challenges of managing site level documents, making the jump to eReg with Viva, usage of CTMS, eSource, and so much more. So without further ado, Amanda Santimaw and Rebecca Martinez. All right, welcome this week, Rebecca Martinez and Amanda Santimaw. How are you ladies doing today?
Well,
doing good.
How are you?
It's already been a crazy morning, but it's the lives we lead at this point, yeah.
Definitely.
Where are you guys coming to us from today?
Phoenix, Arizona, from Arizona Arthritis and Rheumatology Associates.
Right on. What's is it already hot out there?
It's been rainy actually this week.
Oh wow.
Yeah, northern parts of our state are getting their snowstorms.
Yeah, we had hail here yesterday, which is really unusual down in the Phoenix area.
Yeah, that seems wild. I was surprised as I've traveled to Arizona. There's like every ecosystem, I feel like, in Arizona, which you think of it and you think of like desert, but I feel like I was really surprised by like the diversity of the different kinds of environment there. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, you can go to the beach and skiing all on the same day.
Right. Perfect. Well, very cool. I want to jump in like I do all of our guests here. I think it's always really cool to kind of hear people's backgrounds, how they got into the industry. It's always roundabout stories and people falling in by accident. So if you would, whoever prefers to start, just tell us a bit about your background and sort of your clinical trial origin story, if you would.
Yeah, so I was initially planning to go to school, either med school or like physician assistant program. And so I got my undergrad in a biology degree. And afterwards, I was looking for a patient care role that I could get my hours before I was applying to those programs. And I had been currently working as a phlebotomist in the hospital and was wanting something where I could apply my degree and, hopefully make more money. So I was just looking around on the job boards and I just came across a listing for what was a clinical research coordinator, which I'd never heard of. But I was looking at all the qualifications and I was like, yes, I do that. I have that. I was like, so it looks like I'm qualified for this. So I applied and ended up getting interviewed and hired off of that one clinical research job I applied to. Basically, the rest is history. I ended up falling in love with it and never went back to apply to those medical programs. And eventually, probably after being in the field for about 6 years, I applied to a master's program in clinical research management that they have here at ASU because I knew that, my career was going to stay in clinical research at that point. So and I've been at Arizona Arthritis and Rheumatology for 10 years now, and I am the clinical research director. And and I absolutely love it.
Nice. Yeah, I have a soft spot. I was a phlebotomist for a long time before I ever got into clinical research. I think it's really interesting and very intuitive, like step, right, to get into the clinical trial area. And I was, again, same way as you. I wanted to go to med school. I was probably not capable of getting into med school by any stretch. So it ended up working out. And again, like you, just kind of fell in love with it over time. So yeah, I always have a soft spot for the phlebotomist turned clinical research professional.
Yeah, I mean, now in a position where we're hiring research coordinators, that's like definitely a skill that we'd love to see on people's resumes, is knowing how to.
It's surprisingly hard to find like really good phlebotomists, right? I mean, I feel like because it's one of those things that just I think requires a lot of reps, right? A lot of practice. And especially if you become a coordinator and you try to sort of train in, sometimes it's hard to get volume and like get enough sticks in to get really good at it. So yeah, I think that's a undervalued but very cherished skill to have on your staff for sure.
Yeah, and then so kind of the same beginning there. I went to ASU and I was getting my bachelor's in biochemistry, and I was thinking pre-med. And then, when I realized that was 14 more years of school, that didn't sound like something I really wanted to pursue. So at that point, I was just looking for anything that would take me, because I had graduated and I needed a job desperately. And I actually started in preclinical toxicology research. And that was also not for me. I was a formulations chemist, suited up in a Tyvek suit by myself in a little bay for 8 hours a day, and it was pretty depressing. And then that facility actually shut down. Just the way the research field was heading was more clinical trials and not so much into preclinical at the time. So they ended up laying off all of their people. And then they actually helped us, go out and find jobs in the workforce. And so at that point, actually, my coworker had applied for a research assistant position, and she was a step above me in the lab that we were at. And so when she came back, she said, "I think I'm overqualified for that, so you should go and interview for that position." I went that same day, actually, to go for an interview. And the director at the time, which was also 10 years ago, before Amanda stepped into her position as director, and they pretty much said, "Can you start on Monday?" And I had no clinical background, a little bit of research experience. It was a lot of on-the-job training. So started as a research assistant and then worked as a coordinator and then did QA at our site. And then I also, wanted to still pursue further education after that bachelor's degree. And I was thinking PA school. And that's, really what I wanted to do. And I think Amanda talked a little sense into me. Why do you want to do PA school? Why don't you just stick with this? If you're thinking it's going to pay more, you're wrong, because you can do the same here. And so I actually did that same clinical research management master's program at ASU. And now I'm the operations manager at Arizona Arthritis Rheumatology.
Nice. I love that. Did you feel, or how was the transition, I guess, coming in with no more clinical background? Do you think that was particularly challenging, or because there's so many sort of roles and variations that, allowed you to sort of ease into it?
Yeah, I feel like, even though I was promoted to a coordinator within 6 months, I just feel like the people here they were very supportive, and they, took me under their wing and taught me everything from, phlebotomy to what drug accountability was. And, so they just were patient with me. And it was actually, I didn't feel like it was too tough of a transition to make.
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome. I think certainly, the site culture makes a big difference, right? In terms of, whether people coming in fail or succeed. So, I mean, it's a great segue. I mean, I'd love to hear more about Arizona Arthritis and Rheumatology Associates. I mean, how long have you guys been doing research? How long has it been around? What's the sort of site model? Just tell us a little bit more about the setup there.
Yeah, so Arizona Arthritis and Rheumatology Associates, AARA as we call it, has been around for about 30 years. We have now 10 locations, well, soon to be 11 locations in Arizona. And they have been doing research here pretty much since its inception. But it's definitely grown over the years, particularly more so in the past, I'd say 10 years. We've seen a huge growth. But we did, start out by having just research at one or two of the locations. And now we have research at about 8. soon to be 9 locations. And we have about 70 unique clinical trials going on right now. And then we do the studies at multiple locations. So when you total up all of our research contracts, we have about 180 right now in rheumatology trials. And then we've also partnered with a few external research medical clinics that want to do research that we're helping do research. So we've dabbled in a little bit of GI space as well as endocrinology or primary care. So a majority of all of our studies are rheumatology. And our department has about 28 staff that are dedicated to research. We have, I think, 16 coordinators, and then we have a few research assistants, and then we have an administrative team that are all specialized roles. Like we have a recruitment person and a regulatory specialist, a contract specialist, and all those specialized roles we've created to support the coordinators as well. And then our providers, we have a lot of providers here. We have 19 physicians across the locations and 34 advanced practice clinicians. So that's nurse practitioners and physician's assistant. So we are definitely the largest rheumatology clinic and research clinic for rheumatology in the U.S.
Nice. No, that's awesome. It sounds like, that's a big operation. And it sounds like primarily sort of, I don't know, lack of a better word, but, that research is sort of embedded within the clinics where patients are already being seen for the most part. You guys aren't operating out of standalone. You're sort of there, part of the practice, part of the day-to-day, right?
Yeah, definitely. And that's been something that we've been really integrated in with our growth as a practice, is making sure that we're staying in close communications with the leadership here to make sure that as we are expanding and opening new offices, that they're building out the space for research. Because as you know, research is very specialized, and we need to have a special place to put the monitor and a special place to process our labs and store the million lab kits that you get, and then a place away from everything for the coordinators to have their study materials. That's also key, is just making sure that as you grow, making sure that you have that space for research to do it efficiently and effectively.
Yeah, and to that point, I know you guys are fellow Viva users, and at what point, or how have you guys managed, especially at such a big scale? What we do is not necessarily too dissimilar from how you guys operate. We're, a separate company versus part of the companies, but very embedded, integrated within clinics. You get spread out. You try to centralize as much work as you can to create efficiencies and do things that make sense. But were you guys e-reg from the start? Is it something you had to sort of transition into? What was your process, or what did that look like for you guys?
There's a lot of steps.
Yeah, there's a lot of
trial
and error, really. Yeah, so I don't know. Do you want to kind of walk through the life cycle of how we ended up with e-reg?
Yeah, I mean, sort of the beginning, we had a shared drive that we would house the documents electronically. And that was kind of used so that there was remote access to it for internal. But then it was kind of duplicated efforts, because then we were still printing those documents and, putting them in the regulatory binder so that, they were available for the monitors that came on site for those reg reviews. And then, so it wasn't fully electronic though at that point, because we were printing and we still had the wet signatures. And then we were also at the beginning housing some of our documents on our CTMS system. General documents like the CVs and the medical licenses and the GCP. And then the monitors did have remote access to that. However, at that point, I think we were putting note to files in the regulatory binders with instructions on how to navigate to that remote portal. And so then, then the monitors are having to look at 2 different places in order to just try to find those documents. So at that point, we were having CTMS, regulatory binder, and our server for some of those larger documents like protocols and IVs and ECRF guidelines. So it was in 3 different places at first.
And I don't think that's an uncommon part of the transition for sites, right? I've gone through the same things. CTMS seems like, we've got everything here. Why don't we live here in this platform? But I don't know, in my experience, I find that the multiple CTMS systems I've tried that have it embedded they just don't do a great job. It's kind of a pain. They're not really built for it, I think, but it's there. So you're tempted to use it. But like you guys, you kind of end up with like a couple studies on there before you're like, okay, this isn't really working that well. But, so you kind of end up going back to paper. And there's really nothing worse than being spread across, for you guys, 3, different sort of ways of handling your EREG, right? So, even for us, it was then, okay, there are EREG platforms out there. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of information about them, right? So you got to go look at them. You got to try them out. It's a pain. So did you guys go look at and sort of vet a few different systems, or did you guys kind of know off the bat which way you wanted to go?
Yeah, we were definitely wanting to find a solution because we had run into the issue of, now we want to do electronic signatures and allow for remote monitoring. And none of those other the ways we were doing things allowed for definitely electronic signatures or Part 11. So that's when we were like, okay, now we need to really figure out what we're going to do here and pay for something. So we started with using what we were currently doing plus Part 11 DocuSign. So that was our first Band-Aid to the solution. So we went with Part 11 DocuSign and then housed the documents on our server and exported them when the monitor came. Then DocuSign came back and increased their pricing and took away the validation that we were getting for free. So now we're like, okay, now we need to figure out another solution that's more cost effective and maybe specifically geared towards everything, which is housing the documents and the electronic signatures. So we vetted a few of the other vendors out there that came with a cost. Also the e-regulatory solution that's part of our existing CTMS solution or CTMS software. We really wanted to use that one just because, like you said, there's efficiencies of having it all in one place. But again, their cost was high and it didn't have, full capabilities that we were looking for. So our regulatory specialist actually received a marketing email from the Viva Systems, and they were talking about their Site Vault platform. And she attended one of their demonstrations and let us know, hey, this is a really great system, and the best part is it's free. So when we heard that, definitely ears perked up. What do you mean free? How could it be free? But then I got in contact with them. I attended some of their demos, and they assured me that there was no charge to the site, and pretty much that was the deal was done at that point. And they had everything that we need, and there was no cost to our site. So we made the commitment that we were going to cancel our subscription with DocuSign and switch everything over to using the Viva Site Vault, our regulatory.
Yeah, and I think it's no secret that sites don't want to have to pay for more software, right? I mean, I think there's some necessary, I don't want to say evils, but you need a CTMS. I think you just have to have it, especially if you're going to track as many studies as you guys have. And a lot of the CTMSs out there are great, but then you start nickel and diming for every new feature that gets put on. That can become challenging. Even some of the standalone EREG systems are pretty shockingly expensive. I've been surprised if you try to charge me more for my EREG system than I'm paying for a CTMS. Like, that's not going to work. That doesn't make any sense at all. So obviously Viva being free is great. Outside of just the cost or lack thereof, was there anything unique about Viva that drew you to it? I'm sort of starting to get, I'm like you. I wanted everything on one platform because, I spend a lot of time complaining about all the platforms we have to use as research sites. But I'm sort of becoming like the enemy, right? Like, I'm starting to say, like, okay, well, I'd rather use what's best, even if it's not integrated within, one place. So, yeah, I guess to that end, is there something specifically else about Viva aside from cost that seemed to jump out as being, worthwhile?
Yeah, there's one, we couldn't do worse than what we were already doing. So everything kind of looked, better than what we were doing. And then 2, knowing that it was a familiar name and that our monitors were using, Viva on their end, and that, there was talk of it integrating and it being a shared platform, then, that idea for a lot of us was, really something that we looked forward to, because it just meant that, okay, they're going to have access. It's going to go directly, potentially to them. It just seemed more efficient.
Right. And with that dream of having all the sponsors and sites using the same platforms, there you definitely want to go with whichever system is being the most widely accepted and used in the industry, which is what guided us with our choice with our CTMS as well as the eReg. So definitely with the features that the Site Vault had and the fact that there was no cost, we knew that, and the fact that the sponsors were already using it, we knew that it was going to be the biggest eReg platform out there. So we definitely wanted to jump on board with that.
Yeah, I think and somewhat similar for me too. I mean, I'd seen Site Vault. It looked fine, looked good from what I could tell. But I really think the tipping point for me was hearing from, having AbbVie, like we do a bunch of GI studies with them and having them say, oh, hey, we're using Viva Site Vault. We're using Viva. So if you guys want to get on Site Vault, that's going to create obviously a lot easier time and more efficiencies for you guys. And that, I think for me, that was the tipping point. And I didn't really realize the breadth that Viva had in the market until not long after that. I mean, they are involved in use on the back end for a lot of these sponsors. So to your point from earlier, I mean, having something monitors already know that's already well trusted goes a long way, because there's a lot of little companies popping up everywhere now, and that's fine. But where are they going to be? Where are they going to be in 5 years? Financial environment, or are they ever going to be adopted on the sponsor or CRO side? And you don't want to end up with some like weird legacy system that nobody's used and nobody's ever heard of. So no, I love that. And we've seen a little bit slow adoption, but like seeing the sponsors making that connection with the site through Viva, is that something you guys have seen
The
more
Site
or
Connect?
fairly regularly?
No,
Yeah.
it's not. Yeah, it's very few and far between. But anytime I do get a chance to talk to anybody at a sponsor or CRO, I always say, what would be great is if you guys joined Viva and did the Site Connect. So I definitely try to push it as well, hoping that one day everybody will kind of migrate towards that.
Well, and I do think, look, this is an opportunity for sites to maybe make an impression on the industry with that. Like, look, here's the stuff we like. You guys should be using it, because, we live our lives very the opposite, right? Everything's sort of pushed from the top down onto the site.
Mm-hmm.
So I do like and appreciate the opportunity that gives, because something for us to stand up and say, use this, and it's a benefit for everybody. I mean, I hope we see more adoption. I think it will slowly see things move that way. So, I mean, what was the actual process of implementing Viva like for you guys? I know I think we're still fairly on the, I don't want to say, it's not like we just started, but we're still building it out for us. And luckily for us, we're a very small group anyway. So it's not too heavy of a lift, but you guys are much larger. Was that a challenge? And what kind of things did you guys face? Maybe, or were there challenges you didn't expect in implementing it?
Yeah, well, once we made the decision that we were going to go with this, we, presented it to our research staff and provided training and demos to them. Getting the buy-in from the staff was the most important part for the success. And then once we got our, research staff on board with it, we just said, okay, as of this date, which was next month, we just kind of ripped the Band-Aid off and said, we're going to use Site Vault for our regulatory documents and all new studies going forward. And that's what we did. And, it was a little bit of a struggle with the providers mainly having to go on there and do their workflows through there. I think they're the toughest nut to crack. But, once they realized that they didn't have another option, they got on board. And then from there, we, have gotten more and more comfortable with it. And so now we've just recently implemented, as of January, all existing studies that were pre-Viva. We're saying as of this date, every document that we have going forward is now going to be in Viva. So we are now 100% on Viva. And it has been a very quick process, because when did we start up? Mid last year?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So 6-7 months.
Yeah, I was going to ask kind of about that specifically, because I think it's something we're facing right now. Is obviously we had a bunch of stuff in the queue. It hadn't quite started up yet. Makes perfect sense to just start off with Viva, or the few paper documents we had, just get it all transferred over. But the stuff that's existing and hanging out there, it's like, do we go back and start it? Do we just finish on paper stuff we've got on paper, or do we try to make a midstream transition? Has that been challenging in its own ways? I feel like, again, sometimes it's like, I just want to do the simplest thing for now. And then going forward, yes, we'll absolutely put everything on. So that's something we're debating right now too. So I'm actually curious to hear what that's kind of been like.
Yeah. So for one study, we had an audit coming, and to make it easier for them, we just put everything on Viva. And so we went in and uploaded everything that was existing in the regulatory binder. And it took about 4 hours to do that. So it's possible to do it for all the studies, but we decided that, it just wasn't a good use of our time, especially because everybody's just spread so thin. They don't have that extra time to even do this. So we just have our studies just have 2 locations, our legacy studies, if you will. So it is on our server or our paper binder, however we were doing it. And the other half is on Viva. And we just put a note to file in the reg binder and said, anything past this date is on Viva. That's been fine so far.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. I like that. Are you guys looking at or implementing any other sort of site-led technology? Are you guys using like eSource or, eConsent? I guess Viva contains eConsent at that point. But anything else you guys are doing that's sort of, again, site-driven?
Yeah, we are using eSource through a separate platform, pretty much instituted at the same time we did this e-regulatory. So
now we can have full remote monitoring visits, which is great.
Yeah, again, there's a lot of great opportunities that affords. Did you find one to be more challenging than the other in terms of implementation? For some reason, in my mind, eReg seems like low-hanging fruit. It's pretty easy, but Source is a little more, it's a little more complicated, right?
Oh, yeah.
And especially, as you mentioned earlier, for me, a lot of the concern is more physician adoption, PI adoption versus, staff. Has that proven to be more challenging in terms of, sort of change management?
Absolutely. eSource has been very difficult. Everything from building your own templates, and then there's like background coding, which is just above my head.
Yeah. And building in all those audit
checks.
Yeah. What are the edit checks?
Edit checks.
Yeah. For your QA. Cause if you switch to eSource, you can kind of use that as your QA program, which is fantastic. But yeah, there's so much that goes into eSource.
We had to redo like whole processes and procedures in our workflow for just performing a visit at all. So those things we definitely didn't have to put into place with the eReg, which made it a lot easier to implement.
Are you guys willing to share who your eSource is? You certainly don't have to if you'd rather not.
Yeah, well, we use Clinical Conductor as our CTMS, so it was easy decision for us to make to use their eSource as well. Clinical Conductor's been around for a long time, and it has a lot of capabilities, and their eSource is good. They're all definitely been around for a long time, and they were recently purchased by Advara, which is a huge company in the industry. So that's why we chose to stick with them. And there's some integrations between the eSource and the CTMS. So when you complete the visit in eSource, it completes on the CTMS side, which then automatically triggers the billing. And, it's just really great to have it all in one place. We weren't about to completely change our CTMS system because we have a lot, as you know, we have a lot of studies in there. Moving that over to a different system wouldn't be fun for anybody.
And that's where it's tough. We've used, I have real-time CTMS for CTMS. I've used Creo's eSource in the past when we used their CTMS and we'd switched. I like their eSource, but it is, you guys talked about, it's like, there's some coding involved in there. And while it does provide things, like you said, like some sort of like on the spot QC, if you enter something that's not within the range, it's going to tell you, hey, something's wrong here. But it's a pain to like code that stuff, right? It's a challenge and requires a lot of forethought and planning. And then beyond that, like you mentioned too, like once you're in that CTMS, it hardly makes sense to use eSource outside of it. Even if it's not the best eSource you can get, it is triggering your payments. It's connecting all that stuff back to the patient and, maybe their patient subject profiles and things like that. So I'm hoping we eventually hit a world of like interoperability, right? Where you don't have to be in one system and these things can still talk to each other. I mean, do you think that will ever do you think that will ever actually be the case?
Well, I know our CDMS has like the capability to talk to other electronic platforms. We haven't fully dove into it, but I know that is a capability of the clinical conductors, but definitely, yeah, full integration is ideal.
Yeah, and for anyone listening, none of this is picking on any CTMS or eSource in particular. I think it's a bigger industry issue in terms of like a lack of interoperability that I've seen so far, where it kind of sucks as a site because you get sort of pigeonholed into a system and it's hard to get out. And if they don't talk to each other, then what do? Do you give your staff 5 more logins? Nobody wants to do that, right? I mean, it's hard enough as it is to manage all that stuff. Well, did you guys, I guess also, how did you talked about process, right? So it's one thing to have a new platform or a new shiny technology, but then how do you have to change to work within that? Have you always centralized your regulatory, or did you have to, restructure the way that your regulatory department worked in order to best implement something like Viva, or sort of what was your take there?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it certainly made everything easier once we did this. So changes for the better happened.
But as far as like structure to the department, no, we actually have always, in the past 10 years had one person doing our regulatory between all our sites. So at the beginning there, she was traveling from site to site and, doing the filing before the monitoring visits, making sure that everything looked good for that visit. So making the switch just made it so much easier for her to do the job.
Yeah, because like filing, we used to have like a filing bin on site with all the studies they have, and they'd have to like print out all their documents, which, obviously printing is a cost for the site, and then file it in the binder. And then it would have to sit there until Ruth came and did the filing for the monitoring visits. And now we have everybody just forward their emails that have the electronic documents in them to a central email. And our regulatory specialist just goes through there and electronically files them, sitting from home. So it's great. And it allows her, to work from home. And it also allows it to go a lot faster with less cost, because with SiteVault, you can file, like if it's a document, as I was saying, like we'll do one study, but we'll do it at all locations. So she can file all, like a document for all of those studies at the same time with one click of a button, which, obviously just gives back so much time in her day doing things this way.
Yeah. I think it's interesting how I think it could change how, I guess the opportunities sites provide in terms of their staff, right? Because, it may be hard to find somebody who wants to travel between 8 sites and file paperwork. But if you turn that into like a remote position, it becomes a lot more attractive. It's probably easier to hire good talent. And then as you just even get further with, things like eSource, where someone can be doing data entry from anywhere. As long as they can pull eSource, they can do QC from anywhere as well. That kind of stuff I think will help make sites more competitive in the landscape too, because a lot of coordinators, they're just looking for an opportunity to go make more money into CRO and, maybe not have to be on site every single day. So I think that's just kind of an interesting effect hopefully we see down the road as we get more sort of centralized technology platforms like that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and because of this, we have created a new position for data entry specialist that also would be remote based. So they're able to do exactly what you said, is enter our data into the EDC platforms for all the studies and do it remotely.
Yeah, no, I love that. Have your monitors taken all this? Are they happy? They seem, was it a big, lift for them to have to deal with, or are they,
Yeah.
It's pretty split, actually.
Yeah, I think, the regulatory, I'll let Rebecca speak to that, but that's because we're kind of one of the first sites that's really adopted this, that a lot of them are working with. We're having to do all that initial fighting with them and proving why this is a validated system and meets all the requirements, and, re-educating them. I think there's a kind of like the old school paradigm of thought that a lot of sponsors and monitors still have, that, it needs to be on every regulatory document, needs to be on paper, and it needs a wedding signature. And really the FDA came forward and released, their guidance document saying that they want to promote electronic document capture, and they're a lot more relaxed than we actually think they are. And it's just changing a lot of people's way of thinking to say, hey, no, this is okay. We can do this electronically. It doesn't have to technically be an electronic signature. Read and understood is acceptable. It doesn't this document technically doesn't apply to Part 11 because it's not an FDA required document. And doing all that initial education with them is the biggest challenge, but hopefully we'll get them all on board eventually. But yeah, Rebecca can speak to the specific trials and tribulations she's gone through.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so some monitors embrace it. They're excited. I don't have to send you a binder. I don't have to, go to the copy store and make a bazillion copies. And yeah, I mean, I just had this conversation with somebody last week and they're like, I can just send you PDFs, and they were shocked. And our regulatory Ruth, she's just like, tell them don't send the binders. And they do anyway. They still send them. I'm like, please don't send those. We're not going to get them out of the boxes. So it's some people are embracing it, some aren't, and a lot of people, especially with the use of the digital delegation log that we've been using with Viva, a lot of them are just needing to be educated on what's compliant and what's acceptable.
Yeah, I think specifically the digital delegation log is one that might be probably hard for people to wrap their heads around at first, maybe. But I think, what you're speaking to has been part of the reason why even I've sometimes been hesitant to really get some of these things going, is like, are our monitors going to be cool with it? Is it going to make things worse? But I think ultimately it's nice too that this is a site's decision to make, right? I mean, these are their documents that they're tasked with managing. And I think we should really relish that opportunity to be like, look, this is how it is. Yes, take the time to educate. Like you guys said, that's obviously a big part of it. But ultimately, it's better for them too. And they just may need some ribbing in the right direction to realize that. So that's good to know, because again, it's something I feared a little bit in the beginning.
Yeah, we don't ask them anymore.
Right.
We just present them with our SOPs, that we've created to back up that we are using this system, and then throw some guidance documents to them. But yeah, we haven't gone back, even though we've been asked to. How about you just fill out our delegation log? Nope, we haven't gone back on that at all. And a lot of the bigger sponsors, have kicked it up to their internal QA teams in order to grant the approval, which does take a little bit of time and kind of slowed some of our activation timelines up at the beginning, but it seems to be getting faster now. So hopefully more sites use it.
Yeah, I think that's important for sites to hear that. I mean, just like you said, we don't have to ask permission, right? Like if you have an SOP and we're in compliance, we're doing everything correctly, and we're not breaking any rules, this is how it's done. Again, I think that's something that, more sites need to hear. And even though I've always considered myself, tech savvy and on the sort of the forward facing, even I've been scared, I guess, for lack of a better word sometimes. I'm like, oh God, this is going to be a pain in the ass. It's going to make somebody mad. It's going to make their jobs harder. They're not going to want to deal with us, but that's not turning out to be the case. So I think that's really, really encouraging to hear.
Yeah. And once you fight the battle once with a sponsor or CRO, the idea is you won't have to do it again. So yeah, the uptake is going to be a little bit harder and lengthier, but eventually, once everybody that we've worked with has worked with us and knows this is what we do, it won't be a thing.
Yep, that's it right there. I like it. So what else is next for AARA? I mean, in terms of, some new technology you guys want to continue to roll out, or sort of, refine your processes as they are?
I mean, we want to be fully electronic, and we're not 100% there, right? So you mentioned informed consents. Those are still done on paper, wet ink. So it would be great to get to electronic informed consent at some point. So we're still looking into that, and that will probably be the next thing that we do. And then hoping that Viva Vault and Site Vault comes up with a solution for some of the other documents that they don't fit into eSource, and they don't fit into the regulatory document or the regulatory platform, like our monitoring sign-in logs.
Any kind of running log, IP accountability. those types of things are the next step.
Yeah, like master IP logs. And some monitor sponsors still insist on a signature log, a site signature log, like where they see like the actual signature of them. So yeah, so there's just a few more features. I think there's a few holes that are missing with our documents. And then, like I said, informed consent is the next big thing.
Nice. Yeah, that's something that's been interesting to us too, is still having to like really manually fill out a couple of pieces of paper, I guess, and upload those versus, when can those go full electronic? And I don't see any reason why they can't in time, right? It's probably the same. It'll be the same challenge, just educating everybody and making sure everybody's on the same page. But I think those days are probably coming, right?
Hopefully.
I think so. Well, where can people find you guys online?
So our clinic is azarthritis.com, and our research website is trials.azarthritis.com.
Awesome. Well, man, I really appreciate you guys coming on today. Anything else before we sort of sign off here?
No, I don't think so.
It's great meeting you.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, likewise. I think, again, this is something we need to really see. Sites oftentimes don't have a lot of opportunities to push and, own these processes. So I think this is a great place where they do. So thank you for just sort of having this conversation publicly. I think more sites hear about it, more sites get comfortable adopting these things. And then pretty soon it's the norm, right? No more rooms full of binders and, paper cuts and, binders so full that when you open them, they spill out everywhere. I'm really happy those days are slowly getting to be behind us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
As always, thank you so much for listening to Note to File Podcast. Make sure to check us out at notetofilepodcast.com for all of our previous episodes. And make sure to come check out our weekly live streams. They are Tuesdays at noon Eastern on LinkedIn and YouTube. Just search for Note to File Podcast. Thanks so much, guys.